To discuss the award, I'm joined in the studio by our first guest, the Malawian Communications and PR Specialist, James Wood. Hello to you, James. First of all, let's start, as we mentioned there, the Ibrahim Prize. It went to the outgoing Namibian President, who was awarded the prize and a salary of $200,000 a year, I believe. What more do we know about the Namibian President?
Well, first of all, it's good news for Africa that we're highlighting positive leadership role models for the continent.
Yeah.
Now, the president of Namibia, Pohamba, I think just for a bit of background information of him, he was involved in fighting for democracy, for independence, I should say, for Namibia. So he had set up a political party called this was Southwest Africa People's Organization.
SWAPO.
SWAPO, yep, that's the one. So he had set up SWAPO, fighting against South African rule. This was an armed resistance to try and get rid of South African rule in Namibia. Upon success, he became president of Namibia. So if we look at him, his history of what he has done for Namibia over this period has been absolutely phenomenal. With what the Ibrahim Prize have actually indicated with the awarding of the prize. So since he's come into power of Namibia, what he's actually done, if you look at the GDP of Namibia, from roughly about 2005 to 2013, in 2005, there were roughly about GDP per capita, roughly about $3,000 per capita. In 2013, this has gone up to just under $6,000 US. So I was able to improve that. Also, additionally to that, with what he has actually done for the country in terms of literacy, the country's literacy has improved significantly. Yeah. School enrollment for children is actually at 100%. It's actually meeting the MDGs. He's
very much a consensus builder, isn't he? That's seen as a key pillar of his strength.
I think what he's actually done from the time he came in is that he united the country, let democracy actually flow, united the individuals within Namibia, and united them against a common cause, which is the development of Namibia. So I think on that part, I think you have to give credit to him. But also added to that, I think one of the things we've been talking about a lot in Africa is actually gender equality. And he's actually got that consensus around gender equality, where in his parliament, about 25 out of the 72 parliamentarians who hold seats actually female. So he's actually promoted that aspect, bringing a more inclusive governance.
That's very impressive. That's a better proportion than the UK.
It is very impressive. But I also think that beyond that, we also need to look at the other initiatives he actually brought into the country. When he came into power, the country was also facing an epidemic on HIV/AIDS. He was able to bring in measures with ARVs, which reduced the infection rate by 34% in the country. So when you look at a lot of these countries, the workforce are the ones that are affected by HIV/AIDS. So he was able to limit that, ensure that the workforce was thriving. And mother-to-child transmission is less than 4%. So if you look at the success rate that the man has brought to Namibia, it is absolutely phenomenal.
It is an amazing achievement. Does it say something broader about Africa, though, that actually the quality in general of African leadership is getting better?
Yes, you could say that, but I think some would argue that if you look at the winners of the prize, you've mentioned Chisano, Mozambique, Southern Africa. You've had Festus Mogae, Botswana, Southern Africa. Honorary Laureate Nelson Mandela, Southern Africa. Just a few days ago, Pohamba, Namibia, Southern Africa. So maybe some people would argue that, is governance only good in Southern Africa? Is this where we're seeing improving governance?
In fact, it would be fair to say, and accurate, that this prize hasn't been awarded in recent years at all.
It hasn't been awarded in recent years. I think the last award was to Pedro Pires of Cape Verde in 2011. But now what we need to also look at is that when we think of governance, we're looking at the measurement of delivery of public goods to people. Now, we look at the whole of Africa and we see that are people actually delivering? Are they doing what they're set out to do? Are they improving the economy? Are they improving the lives of the individuals? Is there sustainable economic development? This is a very tough ask because we're not just looking at good governance. I think what the Mo Ibrahim Foundation with the prize is looking at is excellence in governance. So I think what you're trying to look at in that is that though the award hasn't been given in those years, it actually sends a statement.
This prize evolved from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Mo Ibrahim is probably the wealthiest African in the UK. You worked for him. What was he trying to do here, do you think, with this prize? We know he's trying to recognise the quality of African leadership, but be more specific.
Okay, no, Mo Ibrahim is a very fascinating character. I used to work for him. I left about over a year ago. Now, the idea of the prize is that Mo Ibrahim saw Africa as an emerging market, a great continent. But the bad thing is that what we tend to see from Africa on media tends to be the negative aspects of Africa.
Yeah.
I gave an example of Kofi Annan as a child in school, where his teacher took a blank piece of paper, drew a black dot on it, and asked the class, what do you see on this? Everybody pointed straight away to this black dot, forgetting that there's this whole paper that nobody's talked about, just the black dot. So that's what we tend to focus on Africa, is the negative side.
Yeah.
So what Mo Ibrahim saw with this prize was that at this point, he's able to actually show where leadership is actually doing well, where we have these role models as individuals such as Welcome Chisano. Chisano was able to develop Mozambique, a country that was coming out of civil war.
Yeah.
And to see the success he actually did for Mozambique. So this prize actually helps draw attention to these leaders and to show them as role models that this is actually what you can do for your country.
Technically speaking, Mr. Pahamba's still in office. When he steps down, what do you think he's going to do with the money? How are things going to play out for him over the next decade? Okay,
just on President Pahamba, I was quite shocked with the award, because on the list of people I had, I put him there as a possible candidate, but I wasn't too sure, because I know he was leaving office. But
who do you think was who was top of your list?
To be honest with you, I did not think there would be a winner. I had put Gebuza Kikwete, sorry, not Kikwete, he's still president. I had put Gebuza of Mozambique, who left. I had Mwai Kibaki of Kenya, but I didn't really think any of these would have won the award.
Yeah.
So even the Pohamba one, I think, was a bit of a shock for me as well, but a great shock. So I think we have to give credit to the prize committee on that one. I'm completely unaware and didn't see that one happening. Now, Pohamba, according to the information that I've accessed, is that his mandate in office actually finished in December last year, so December 2014. He's just waiting for the handover. Now, what Pohamba has said in regards to the prize money, which is $5 million, and then paid over 10 years after that, $200,000 for life, salary a year. What Pohamba has said is that he's going to channel this money into the Pohamba Foundation, which is helping children from disadvantaged communities gain access to proper education, higher education. So that's where his initiative, or that's where the money will be going to promote that initiative.
Good, excellent. Well, we're going to move on now. We're going to take a very short break there, but when we come back, we'll be finding out more about James's home country, Malawi, his take on the toll of the floods there, and how Malawi has coped with the immense challenges those rising waters have posed. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News, as we continue our conversation with my guest this week, the communications and public relations expert James Woods, a Malawian-born man who has observed the recent changes faced by his home country and its neighbours in southern Africa as the floods have swept across the region. Nearly 250,000 people, many more than originally thought, have been affected by those devastating floods as they ripped through Malawi earlier this year. Many of the 230,000 who were forced to abandon their homes are still unable to return and rebuild their lives. James, these numbers, they are truly shocking, aren't they?
They are extremely shocking, and I would have to say I actually think the numbers are possibly higher than that. And it is very sad, because I think when we talk about Malawi at the moment, it seems to be negative, negative, negative. I think it's about time Malawi got a bit of a break.
Well, what is the strategy, though, in dealing with the havoc that's been wreaked? And what are the main challenges the country now faces?
Well, firstly, I think Malawi was not prepared for such atrocities to actually occur due to the flooding. Flooding is a regular occurrence in Malawi, but not to this extent. Now, the issue over here is that if you look at the damage that the rain has caused, you've mentioned the figures already, the amounts of people being displaced. We're also looking close to 1 million people who've been affected due to agriculture, people reliant on the land for their food, livestock. So these numbers are extremely high. Now, the biggest challenges that we faced was at the time the floods happened, the Malawi government, for their disaster management, did not have enough money. They had about $200,000 to combat it at the time. And as you do know, the devastation itself has gone in the tens of millions of pounds. Now, aid has been a little bit slow trickling into Malawi. There's been a lot of reasons as to why aid has been slow. Some of the arguments have been at about 2013, Malawi experienced the Cashgate scandal, where a lot of money was siphoned off the government system. So probably the donor community was a little bit reluctant in sending money through.
And it's critical. If there's any kind of hiccup in Malawi's aid, that's a really big problem, because I think 40% of the money that's needed by Malawi comes from international aid.
Yes, it does. So you're looking at the deficit already of how the country can combat such problems. But though I say that the aid hasn't trickled in, it has started coming in a little bit slowly. But now a lot of the aid organizations, like for instance, DFID has sent over about £4 million, but that has not been channeled directly to the government. The government set up a ministry, a department to handle the atrocities, to handle the disaster through the Office of the Vice President, Saulos Chilima. But the UN bodies, DFID and other organizations have been channeling money directly to NGOs in Malawi, directly to UN bodies, because they find that as a safer way. Maybe you could say there's no trust in the governmental system, which I'd hate to think that's the case, because I think we have a new government in place. There should be a bit more trust in how the country is actually going to handle these funds that are coming through. Other challenges we're facing is actually whether this aid is actually reaching the right communities. Because there's been problems in accessing certain areas. There's also the problems of efficiency and the experience, expertise of individuals handing out the aid. We've also had, I was reading yesterday, I think it was one of the news outlets in Malawi, talking about the cholera outbreak.
That's a big problem in the wake of the flood, isn't it? I mean, it's very, very difficult to control disease.
It is extremely difficult, and I think once again, the country needs to be really prepared with that. And to me personally, I would have to say that a lot of the aid hasn't reached a lot of these communities, and there's still a lot more to be done. The country itself needs a lot of expertise, a lot of support from the donor communities and actually Malawians in the diaspora who can actually assist.
But actually the signs are good. I mean, Malawi is a country at peace. It doesn't have many problems that other African nations have, so it's kind of worth the international investment, isn't it?
Extremely so, and also beyond that, as we said, if we look at the amount of people that have been affected, this is a major disaster. And I think nobody can sit aside and watch whilst people are going through these problems. Yeah,
it's very, very difficult. And sadly, last year the government and the IMF predicted growth of 5.8%. So it was a country that was making quite rapid strides, and now this natural disaster.
Yes, and not to forget, Malawi is also a country heavily reliant on agriculture. So we're looking at about over 63,000 hectares of arable land that has actually been damaged due to these floods. Now, Malawi, as you said, relies on agriculture for a lot of its export, a lot of its foreign exchange. So this being damaged, it means that we're back. We've just taken about 2 steps back.
I know.
And secondly on that, we're also trying to be food secure. Now, it means that we'll probably have low stock to support individuals in terms of food.
In mid-January, the President estimated that it would cost £51 million to just repair the damage. Do you think that's an accurate estimate, or do you think more is needed?
To be honest with you, I've seen different figures on that. Some were saying £37 million, £51 million. But I think at this time, to actually really know the devastation in regards to infrastructure, loss of lives, agriculture, I think it's very difficult to put a figure on what would actually determine what the right amount is. I think the bottom line is that they do need a lot of money to get the country to back where it was and actually prevent such atrocities happening in future, such disasters happening in future.
I mean, what do you do about a natural disaster like that? I mean, presumably Malawi has suffered flooding many, many times before.
Malawi has suffered floodings several times before, but not to this extent. But I think this was a wake-up call as well to have planning in order, so to have policies in place. If such disasters occur, how do you handle that? How do you have the mechanisms to deal with such problems? I think which is what we lacked. So this has been a wake-up call to those people in charge, the powers that be, on how do we prevent such scales actually getting to this level ever again.
Have any practical steps been taken to build a big contingency plan?
I think right now that is what they're looking at. So I think not to forget that the flooding itself is this only happened in January, so the steps they put into place would take time to actually be implemented. So, but I think the country is going in the right direction, is what I believe.
More than half the country does, in fact, live below the poverty line. But there are plans to explore Lake Malawi for oil and gas. Very briefly, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, that's a very, very contentious topic in Malawi. I think causing a lot of people to argue on that. Now, Malawi itself, over the years, heavily reliant on agriculture, as we've been discussing. So they've been trying to look at diversifying the economy, moving away from tobacco. Tobacco itself contributes to about 70% of Malawi's foreign exchange. Added to that, if you add rice, if you add tea, we're looking at about 90% of the foreign revenue, foreign exchange is through tobacco, rice, tea. Now, the country has realized that tobacco, with the fluctuating prices globally, it cannot rely on tobacco. We have a lot of the smoking bans coming into place, so we need to really look away from that. We're also prone, we've talked about the flooding. Agriculture itself is prone to these shocks. Now, oil is one of the big things that Malawi is looking at. Now, there's been recent discoveries of oil in the lake, which has led to a bit of heated arguments between Tanzania and Malawi on who owns which parts of the lake. President Mutharika, the current president, and President Kikwete of Tanzania have held high-level discussions on this, and it seems as if we're moving in a direction where they're agreeing on what should be done. Now, the Lake Malawi itself has, they've divided the lake into 6 oil blocks. And actually, 3 of these blocks actually cover the lake, the other 3 on land. Now, licenses have already been issued, to companies who are interested in exploring the lake for oil. So these are what we'll call as exclusive prospective licenses, EPLs. So these were given to companies, SAC Oil from South Africa, Surestream Petroleum, the UK, RAK Gas in the UAE.
Yeah.
Now, the only issue that we're facing right now is that with the oil issue, the way the licenses were handled, we're still heavily reliant on a law that was passed in the late 1980s, mid-1980s.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit out of date. So the current government has seen this as a bit of a problem because we're not looking at the environmental assessments, we're not looking at how the conditions would help the environment, help the communities. So they've decided to review the contractual issues around this. So as we're speaking right now, the government has put the licenses on hold.
Yep, good to hear. Good to hear about that development anyway. Well, now time for another very short break here, but when we come back, we'll be discussing Africa's economic prospects, the continent's emerging markets. Please stay with Talking Africa. We'll be back in just one moment. Well, welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News as we continue the conversation with my guest this week, James Woods, a communications and public relations consultant from Malawi, a man who has been following the business story in recent years, particularly across Africa, with great interest. Emerging markets in Asia and Africa still reign supreme. They're at the top of the global growth projections over the next 2 years. According to a recent report, Nigeria is projected to expand 4.9% this year, and Kenya will probably grow 6%. Very optimistic figures, do you think, there?
I think Kenya sounds about right, I would say. On the aspect of Nigeria, I can see why they're backtracking a bit on the figures, because the Minister of Finance, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, had initially mentioned that they'll grow about 5.5% in the coming year. But that's been backtracked, been reduced, as you've mentioned. I think that has a lot to do with Nigeria being heavily reliant on crude oil, where we've seen the oil prices actually plummet. But
let's look at the reality of Kenya, for example. Unemployment and poverty remain such big factors there. So although there's that 6% projected growth, what's life like for people on the ground?
The reality is that if you look at Kenya, 6% growth is not enough for Kenya. They need at least between 7% to 10% if they're going to combat high unemployment and living conditions. So they're still moving in the right direction, but as we're saying, those figures, they're great for now, but they need to actually aim higher than that. And I think for Kenya as well, the other issue is that 60% of the GDP is heavily reliant on the service sector. And if we're looking at Al-Shabaab's operations and security in the country, that's just taken a very big risk in regards to the tourism sector, which employs a vast amount of Kenyans. So that has also had a very big effect on that. But now at least it's stabilizing. So I would say that if the country itself continues on this track that has been reported, if they're able to grow on that track, they're still an agricultural country as well. Technology is heavily developing. So I do believe that if they can, 6% is not enough. So I believe if they can actually get that up to about 7%, we'll see the poverty levels actually reducing. You
mentioned Al-Shabaab there. Do you think that Al-Shabaab and other points of conflict have really impacted upon Kenya's tourism trade?
It has impacted extremely, because not to forget that, as we're saying, the service sector, the tourism trade is what Kenya is heavily dependent on. Once you cut that, you're cutting a lot of the foreign exchange that's coming into the country, you're cutting a lot of the jobs coming into the country. And secondly, when investors are coming into a country, they're looking at the political stability, the security in the country. So this plays a very big role in investors' interest in investing in a country. If they see security is going low, they may sell their stocks in that country and move out. While other investors will probably be afraid to come in.
Kenya's part of the East African community. Has that been important to it, do you think?
It has. I would say it has been very important, because the East African community, we're looking at Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda. What they've been aiming at doing is actually promoting trade between each other. So in terms of, we talk about Africa's brain drain, whilst they've been looking at Africa's brain gain, where they can transfer ideas and communication between each other, opening up the borders, making it easily accessible for links of trade between them. And also, secondly, I think beyond that, if we look at the Chinese investment in Kenya right now, they're building a port which is linking Kenya to Uganda, and then Uganda looking at linking it to Rwanda for the trade aspect, reducing the cost of trade. So this would be extremely beneficial to Kenya.
The world's youngest state, South Sudan, is also set to become part of that community, But actually, as things stand, it seems unlikely that that will happen, just at the time the US is encouraging the UN to impose sanctions.
I think that's a very interesting one, but I think a lot of this stuff, with political will, a lot of stuff can happen. Yeah. I think beyond looking at the sanctions whatsoever, I think as Africa, we need to look for that unity and in the EAC. And for them, I think they will decide the best way forward. The US may impose sanctions, and we'll see what will happen with that.
And what about Nigeria?
Nigeria is an interesting one. I think for Nigeria, as I was mentioning, is that Nigeria is heavily reliant on crude oil. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at about 70% of its export revenue is from crude oil. Now, with the plummeting prices, that has taken a very big hit. But if we put crude oil aside, the naira, due to that, the currency has actually dropped to the dollar, about 19% devaluation on the naira. Yeah. So that's hit the economy hard. Secondly, we're also looking at security risk in Nigeria. Boko Haram, they're playing a very big role. Once again, investors are very afraid. I understand that a lot of foreign investors actually withdrew their stocks from Nigeria last year, about December last year, amounted to about $4.5 billion in fears of the investments in Nigeria.
The government is trying to build a strategy and trying to implement that strategy very quickly ahead of the elections on the 28th of March. How much impact do you think those security measures are having?
I think that there's a question to ask on that, because it seems to be the postponement of the election has come at a very interesting time. They're postponing the election based on the security threat. They had the last 5 years to work on the security threat.
Exactly.
They had a budget, the military had a budget of about $5 million to combat this. So I don't know what 6 weeks would do for the government in terms of combating the security threat.
Can I just ask your opinion? Do you think those elections are likely to go ahead? I mean, the informed opinion suggests that they absolutely do have to go ahead, and yet you're right. Approaching security concerns is a long-term matter, isn't it?
It is a very long-term matter. I think they failed over the years. It won't be won over within 6 weeks. The elections, it'll be interesting to see if they do go ahead, but not to forget as well that they need to stabilize the economy. The moment they're still postponing the elections, that will not attract investors in their country. A lot of people will be leaving. The government has actually taken spending cuts, which means a lot of areas aren't actually getting the funds required to grow the economy. So I think it's actually better for the elections to happen than leave it in a volatile situation where people don't know where they're going. And for policy to be implemented, you need a government in there that is stable. You cannot implement policy when you don't know which government is going to come in or if they're staying in power.
Yeah. I mean, and what about corruption? I mean, I appreciate that inroads have been made on the subject, but actually at the end of the day, a country won't grow unless it has the fundamentals in place to allow proper economic strategy to be implemented.
I think corruption is extremely endemic in quite a lot of our African countries. And Nigeria itself, unfortunately, we tend to hear a lot about corruption issues emanating from there. Now, the only thing is that to curb corruption, you need an active civil society, people who can actually hold the government accountable. But you also need a government that is actually willing to create change, to deliver for the people. So I think to look at it, maybe these elections will be the answer to that the country can start moving in the right direction. But no matter what you do, I think corruption will always be present in any society.
Yeah.
But it's what mechanisms you put in together. Do you put an independent body that looks at the corruption issues facing the country? Do you look at people who can actually question the accountability of these individuals? Do we put more transparency measures in place? So these are questions that the government itself needs to do, and also the international community who are actually investing in these countries need to ask for tighter policies. Yeah,
it's a global view. You have to take a global view, don't you, really?
Exactly. I think that is very important for Nigeria and other African countries. I think we can't just stand there and accept these things to happen.
OK. James Woods, communications and PR expert, thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you.